Hello and welcome to Conversations with Hannah. I'm Hannah Kane, your state representative, and I am joined here today by my good friend Melanie Petrucci, who has about 1 million different titles in our town, probably most importantly mom and wife, but you are extremely involved in a lot of what goes on in this community, and I've had the pleasure of working with you on many, many different initiatives, and I'm really glad that you could join me here today.
Well, thanks, Hannah. It was an honor for you to ask me to join you today, so thank you. I am involved, and I love every minute of it.
And now you're writing too. You're writing for the Community Advocate. You've had some great pieces.
Thank you. I just looked quickly at the issue that's coming out, and I have like 6 articles.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. So that's where you'll find me, at my iPad.
That's great.
Should we dive in?
Certainly. Please, feel free.
We've got a lot to cover here.
We do. It's been a busy couple of months.
And you've got lots of updates. I happen to be on Rotary, one of the hats I wear, and we had at our weekly meeting last week, you were our guest speaker.
Yeah, that was great.
It was great, and I was exhausted leaving because I was exhausted for you, mainly because of everything that you've been doing. So tell me a little bit. I know there's a lot going on in Beacon Hill that you want to discuss, but tell me a little bit about what you've been doing in the community.
Sure.
Lots of stuff going on.
I would love to. And I really did enjoy coming to Rotary last week. Such a great group of civic-minded individuals, and you all do so much in this community as well, so thank you for all that you do. It has been a busy couple of months. The community, some people think August is sort of a downtime for us, because you're on the host committee as well.
Right.
August is the golf tournament for us, the charity golf tournament that we do, and this was the 3rd year for the Hannah Kane Charity Classic, and we support 3 charities primarily through the monies that we raise there: St. Anne's Human Services, Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, and Westboro Food Pantry. And this year we were able to award $54,000 to the 3 charities, so $18,000 each, which was really exciting. And actually I figured out the other day, our 3-year total is $150,000 that we've raised, which just seems almost impossible when you think about it in that large scale, but it's really through the generosity of so many businesses and individuals in our community who step forward to support this charitable tournament, and you've always been a strong part of it, and I really thank you for that. And I think you have fun when you're there on those days. We get to see so many different people, and
so much fun. And this year we had the eclipse, which is an added bonus.
It was. No one will forget where they were on that day. That's for sure.
Well, I find it very heartwarming that the generosity just keeps growing and building, because you've incrementally increased each year you've been doing this.
That's always been our goal. When Matt started hosting it, which is 6 years ago now, and Karen had hosted it for 10 years before that. When Matt took over, he wanted to add St. Anne's Human Services in, which I fully supported, but we made a commitment that we didn't want to decrease the amount that had been given the years before, which had been $10,000 to each of the 2 charities at the time. So, that sort of was really a goal of ours. And then part of what I decided a couple years ago was I also wanted to work on making sure that if the tournament were to ever end, God, and I don't want it to, but were it to ever end, this is a significant amount of funds that we're raising for these charities, and we don't want to just have it just stop. So we also tried to put away a little bit each year so that, whenever there is an end point, there's some additional funds for the following year that can help them transition, or till someone else picks something else up. So that's also an important part of what we're trying to do as well. But it really is something that I look forward to probably most all year long, because it is a really fun day, but you're out there for 3 terrific causes, and really supporting people who volunteer all year long at 3 agencies to make them able to do what they do in our communities to help people in time of need. So it's a terrific event.
And that's not all. You recently hosted your 4th annual charity event that kind of kicks off Spirit of Shrewsbury. Tell me about that.
So a couple years ago, part of what I really think about when I think about Shrewsbury is the spirit of giving and the caring for each other here. And during the Spirit of Shrewsbury week, I had noticed that there wasn't necessarily sort of one charitable event that was going on, and so came up with the idea of hosting a charitable event and rotating the local charities that would benefit from it. So the first year, I had heard that the SOAR, the Shrewsbury Oil Assistance Relief Fund, was almost out of funds. Terry Cassidy had called and said, I'm not sure what to do. And so that was our beneficiary the first year. The second year was during the library's building campaign, and so we focused on raising some private dollars for that. Last year we did Binkies, and so it was Let Your Spirit Love, and really all about supporting children in their greatest time of need and their families. And then this year, one of the things that I've been working on the last year with Senator Moore at the State House was trying to get into the state budget some funding for Veterans Inc. They were starting up in Shrewsbury a substance abuse and an addiction treatment center. And we had sought $100,000 out of the state budget. We got it through last year, and then it was subject to a 9C cut, so we never ended up getting the funding. This year we did get it in the state budget, and it's in for $50,000. And we were really happy about that, but it was sort of nagging on me that we weren't able to get the full amount that we had wanted to get. So we thought this year, what better way to sort of celebrate the opening of this clinic at Veterans Inc. on South Street, and really celebrate the fact that Veterans Inc. is doing something that's not being done anywhere else in the country by a community nonprofit, and wanting to make sure that we were providing them some additional funds to help sort of reach their goal of what they had wanted to for their one-time costs, but also as a community recognizing the important work that they're doing there and supporting our veterans.
I don't think a lot of people really fully understand what they're doing.
They do, and they do an enormous amount of work. And one of the things, everyone is clearly aware that we're in the midst of an opioid epidemic, but veterans have a disproportionate amount of folks who are impacted by it. It's higher than any other sort of group of people. And so wanting to make sure that we are supporting veterans is important. And these aren't just veterans from Shrewsbury or even Central Mass. These are veterans from across the Commonwealth who are coming here to get the treatment they need in order to get back on their feet. And so, we celebrated the opening. You were there in August at Veterans Inc., the ribbon cutting of this program, and they're doing a great job with it. And we wanted to really focus on the work that's going on in the community. And so that's the I guess the two-part piece of doing this fundraiser is, one, to raise money, but two, to raise awareness that these groups are in our community and they're doing all this great work, and we really as a community want to support what it is that they're up to.
Good. And then leading into that, right after that event was the Spirit of Shrewsbury, which you were very busy.
Such a great week. Yeah, I love the Spirit of Shrewsbury. You get to see so many people that you don't normally come across throughout the year, and to catch up and visit. And it was funny. So my husband and I were going up at 7 in the morning to set up my booth at Oak, and my husband's kind of saying, "Oh, where are we going to park? How are we going to lug this?" My husband's the enthusiastic guy that he is sort of complaining on the way up there about, are we going to be able to get close enough? And we pull up, and all of a sudden there are 10 kids who are there volunteering to help people like us who are unloading and trying to move our stuff across the grass over to our spot. And I just looked at them, I'm like, this is the Spirit of Shrewsbury. Here we are, and here are kids, the next generation of people among us, and they're learning about community spirit and giving and being a part of it. And it was just a really great moment, and I just really love the whole start of finish of Spirit of Shrewsbury. And it's really not a week, it's a month. I mean, we start, I was down on Lake Quinsigamon judging
that's right.
the boats. The theme this year was music, and that was a lot of fun, being out on the lake and looking at all the people who've decorated their boats. And then there's all these people on the shoreline who are waving, and so... I
always miss that this year. Next year I'm going to try to make it.
It's just a lot of great community spirit that comes out. And of course the parade is always great. It was very warm this year, but I'd much rather have it warm than raining, so that's okay.
That's true.
We come around the corner, turning onto Oak from Maple Ave, and there is the Falzoy family sitting there with their mom, Barbara Donahue. And,
yes.
And I always enjoy seeing them, and I really it's remarkable how much they've given to this community through really being a part of this from the beginning of the Spirit of Shrewsbury 21 years ago now. And I understand that this is Tom Falzoy's last year, that he's going to be part of the organizing committee. So he said. But it is not Sue's last year, which is the good news.
That is good.
But really just a remarkable family, and they've given so much. And everyone else who works on the committee, I really commend them for pulling off such a great celebration of our community.
I was on that committee one year. It was quite amazing.
I'm sure it's a lot of work. And the other town in the district, Westboro, is celebrating their 300th anniversary, and they likewise have an amazing committee that has put on activities and events all year long. And in September, early September, was the 2.3 mile parade, which was absolutely fantastic. They don't have parades every year like we do in Shrewsbury. They do them on sort of the big events.
Right.
And this was just an absolutely amazing parade. They had thousands of people lining the over 2 mile length of the parade route. I think they had 140 distinct units in the parade. I was at the front with, I share representation at Westboro with Representative Danielle Gregoire and Representative Carolyn Dykeman.
Right.
We were at the front of the parade with some other elected officials. And then when it got done, I sort of ran back probably about halfway and then caught up with the Westboro Republican Town Committee, who had a great float. They had made an elephant and were pulling that and handing out flags and beads to the kids. And it was just a lot of fun and great energy. And it's remarkable when you have an event like that, just to see how people feel about where they live and really celebrating not only your community, but the people that you live in your community with. And to see the kids who, in Westboro might never have experienced a parade because they don't have them that often, to be able to be part of it and excited about, and all the schools had, kids marching and they were excited. So I really feel blessed to see within these two communities just such a true feeling of joy about being, excited to be part of our communities and enjoying where we live and the people that we live with.
Well, I'm a transplant, and
That's right. Colorado.
It didn't take long for that to seep into my persona. I just love living here. I wouldn't imagine living anywhere else right now. So, okay, that was all the fun part.
Yes, that was
most of the fun part. So now let's talk a little bit about one of your biggest priorities, which has been the topic of marijuana legislation.
Yeah. So
legalization.
This really, I was concerned about the ballot question, and so I joined together with Governor Baker and Speaker DeLeo and Boston Mayor Marty Walsh and a few of my other colleagues, and we spent about a year and a half out there talking about the impact if question 4, the legalization of recreational marijuana, was passed. And for me, it was not so much a philosophical issue as it was what I termed an implementation issue. I just didn't feel we were ready or prepared, and that some of the important public health and public safety aspects were being overlooked, and I thought those were very important and needed to have better consideration than they did. Unfortunately, it passed, and so for me, the next step was, okay, I've sort of all these things that I've talked about over the course of the last year and a half. I now need to think about how would I offer up through legislation the opportunity to improve the law. And so in January, I filed 12 bills, and I was also appointing as the ranking minority member on marijuana policy. And through the course of the next couple months, we held 5 statewide hearings, of which one, we held here in Shrewsbury. I had requested we have one in Central Mass, and we held it at the high school. And we really sought input from people all across the state in terms of, what were their concerns? How did they think the law could be improved upon? What were the things that they didn't want touched and were very happy with? And we took all of that feedback and we took all the bills that had been filed, and in the House we released what's called an omnibus bill, which is essentially where you pool a lot of different bills into one. I was very honored that the bill that it was released under was one of my bills. I had filed it because I was concerned about the structure of the regulatory authority that the ballot initiative had set up, which was essentially 3 cannabis control commissioners, but all being appointed by the treasurer. And that concerned me for a couple of reasons. One, you never want to have one constitutional office holder appointing all of a regulatory authority like that, because essentially there's the opportunity for regulatory capture, which is essentially you could fund an effort to put a person in office who was very friendly to your issue, and where you only have one person appointing, it's not that difficult to do. I thought it was important that we disperse the authority, and so my bill that I filed called for expanding it from 3 commissioners to 5, but also expanding it from the treasurer appointing to give the governor, the AG, and the treasurer each one appointment, and then to give the final 2 appointments by majority of those 3 office holders. And that was what we ended up adopting, the model. And we also really changed it from being 3 people that the ballot initiative had called for with primarily industry experience within the marijuana, to the governor appointing someone who had a public health background and the attorney general appointing somebody who had a public safety background.
That's important. So you can draw from so many different areas of expertise that are affected by this.
Exactly.
Issue.
And that was our goal, having a more well-rounded group of people who were in charge of moving this forward. And that group has now been named. By the end of August, they had to be appointed, and they are now moving ahead with their work, which is great. But when we passed the bill in the House, the Senate had passed an entirely different bill, and we approached it differently. We sort of repealed the ballot initiative and rewrote it, keeping much of what was in it, but adding in new sections. The Senate amended the ballot initiative. And so the two different approaches meant you now were sort of sitting with the underlying ballot initiative, a House bill and a Senate bill, and you had to figure out how do you pull these together. The way that we do that on Beacon Hill is if we have two topics that have been passed in both chambers but have very different structures to them, we set up what's called a conference committee. And you have 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate, and you have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican on each. I was appointed to be the Republican from the House negotiating with the Senate. So I spent about 4 weeks negotiating that. And it was difficult negotiations because we all certainly had our own particular way of thinking we needed to proceed. But ultimately we came together and produced a bill, and then that was passed by both the House and the Senate. The governor subsequently signed the end of July. So in addition to sort of the structure, one of the other pieces that was really important to me was the public health component of it. In particular, making sure that our youth are less exposed to marijuana than they otherwise would be in moving forward with legalization here. One of the things that we had seen happen in other states when marijuana was legalized was youth become sort of a belief that it's less harmful. So where about 20 years ago, 80% of youth believed marijuana to be harmful and they shouldn't use it, now that number is about 30%. And so you've had this huge movement in youth thinking that's no big deal.
Right.
At the same time, you've had the product change a lot. So it is a lot more of a powerful product these days when you're using it than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago when I was young. And so the level of THC in products is much higher. So, you know, one of the things
and it's coming in different forms too.
Oh, yeah, today about half of it is in sort of the grass form or a joint, and about half is in edible products, which can be anything. And again, there are issues around marketing and labeling. The industry likes to market it as close to the non-marijuana product as they can so that it's very similar looking. But we did something that's a first in the nation here, which was in every other area where marijuana has been legalized, it's required that you cannot advertise to people under the age of 21, but the way that you look at audience composition data, they said that basically you have to show that 71.6% of your audience is older than 21. That's not really a high bar because that mirrors what we are in America. About 71.6% of people in America are older than 21. So that's not really prohibiting anyone 21 and younger from seeing advertising and marketing. So in Massachusetts, we increased that to 85. You have to prove that 85% of your market is above the age of 21. And so that will hugely limit how much our youth will sort of see advertising, hear it on the radio, see a billboard. A lot of those things are now sort of moved beyond the ability for the marijuana industry to market in. So that's something that we're very proud of, that we did establish this, and hopefully it allows, if there are other states looking at doing this, they now have a model on how to prevent youth from being as exposed to it as they may have otherwise been.
Wow. What about the Commission on Driving Under the Influence?
Yeah, that's another area where Washington State, which had legalized a couple years before us, the first year after legalization, they had about a 50% increase in the number of fatalities that were caused by marijuana impairment. And it's very difficult to judge marijuana impairment. It is unlike alcohol where you have a breathalyzer. There is nothing akin to that yet. So not only is it difficult to judge impairment, but the courts have not upheld when police will bring someone in saying we believe they're impaired of marijuana. And so what we did in the legislation is we put together a commission that said, public safety officials need to look at this. We need to come to some agreement on, how are we going to judge impairment in people? It's also more difficult because, as we said earlier, it's not like you can sort of pull over a car and you see sort of the marijuana smoke and you smell it, and where it's edibles, I mean, you could have essentially a cookie sitting there and you wouldn't know if that's a edible with marijuana in it or not. And so it just becomes very difficult for law enforcement to deal with this. And so we set up a commission to spend a year essentially coming up with best practices and what is out there that's coming, because we certainly know that it's moving towards being able to better impair sort of through some instantaneous test like we have the breathalyzer, but it's not there yet. So sort of how do we bridge that time between having that ability to detect very quickly if someone's impaired to the point that they can't drive. It's also a different product in that, unlike alcohol, which dissipates out of our system, marijuana stays in our body, in our fat cells, for up to 30 days. So you can't always tell if someone's impaired at the moment because they're being judged at a certain level if you're taking a blood test, or if it was used a day or two ago and that level is just still high in that person. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's work that we need to do around this area to make sure that we certainly do not want to see, we have enough fatalities on our highways as it is, and we do not want to add this into the mix.
Okay, 3 little things we haven't touched on, not so little. Expanded Cannabis Advisory Council.
Yeah, there was a 15-member set up in the legislation, the law that was passed. We expanded it to add some additional folks on there. And one of the things that we also did in this law was we brought medical, which had been under the purview of the Department of Public Health. That's now coming under the Cannabis Control Commission. So we also expanded this advisory commission to make sure that we had people on there who could appropriately cover the topics of medical marijuana, either through being in the medical community or users, et cetera.
And then opting out. A community can opt out altogether.
So in the law that had been passed in November, it called for a vote of the voters if a community chose not to. And there is no real such thing as a vote of the voters. And so it was very unclear in that language how a community could go about doing that. So one of the things is we clarified, and we also bifurcated communities. We said the communities that voted no on question 4, they have up until December 31st of 2019 to opt out through their legislative body. So for us in Shrewsbury, that would mean bringing forward to town meeting a zoning bylaw and a general bylaw to opt out of having marijuana, whether it's retail or cultivation or testing or all of it in our community. And the communities that voted yes on question 4 sort of had a 2-tier to step through. They have to go out and have a vote of their voters, so they have to have an election, a ballot election, which could be held at the same time as a municipal or other election that's going on. And they also then needed to go to their legislative body and adopt the bylaw through their legislative body. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the 6 of us who were on this conference committee negotiating this, some of us were proponents of legalization and some of us were not. And so, this was all compromise language that we came forward with, that we felt either stuck to what the original ballot initiative intended, or was clarifying it enough that there was a better understanding for municipalities, how do they opt out and move forward with this. And so, we do believe that we did that, but again, this is something that's not a one and done in my opinion. There will be things that we do for years ahead in order to better clarify through legislation or through regulations, how this industry is going to operate in Massachusetts. So this was sort of a big first step, but I'm sure there will be much more that will come forward to us in the coming years to deliberate on.
There's going to be so much coming down the pike, I'm sure.
There is. And I think most people, this will, if they stay on track, sales will start happening July 1st of 2018. And so we're sort of also in a middle period where there are people that have almost sort of forgotten about it because it's not really sort of front and center for them right now. But it is essentially a year for the Cannabis Control Commission to get all the rules and regulations up and running, and for the companies to apply for licensing and then to start selling.
And then that leads to the taxes. The tax surrounding the sale.
The tax, when it was passed in the law, was set at an extremely low rate. It was essentially our sales tax, which we have on naturally, is 6.25, and then they had a state excise tax of 3.75. What we have to remember about marijuana is because it's federally illegal. This is an illegal substance. Some of the things we would traditionally rely on, we cannot. We cannot rely on the FDA. We cannot rely on the USDA to do some of the things that they would naturally do because this is a product that is impacted. And so we have to set up those organizations within our own state government, and we have costs that we wouldn't naturally occur. So, the sales tax rate is obviously still 6.25, but we increased the excise tax up to 10.75, and we believe that would give us not only enough to fund some of those things that we have to do in state government we haven't had to do before, but also to do things like set aside additional funds for substance abuse, because we know that when there's more people using, there's going to be more people who are become dependent on it or have issues with it. We want to do more around education for our youth, that you should not be using this, even though it's legal and you may see your adults in your life using it. You are not to use it. And we have to do things like public safety campaigns, just like we do, don't text and drive or click it or ticket. Now we're going to be doing ones on, don't have marijuana products and drive. Because again, going back to edibles, if somebody is used to smoking a joint and getting high, that's instantaneous. When you consume edibles, it can take 20 minutes to 2 hours before you begin to feel the effects, because instead of having sort of the smoke come in and go right up to give you the high, you're consuming it, and it takes your digestive system a little bit longer to sort of get that high out of the product. And so what tends to happen is people can ingest something and then they can say, oh, I'm fine, it didn't even impact me. And then they can be speeding down the Mass Pike and all of a sudden become impaired. And so we need to, again, educate people around those issues. And then we added a local option. So similar to what we adopted in Shrewsbury years ago on the meals and the hotel tax, where there was an optional tax that was set by the state saying if you want to adopt it, you can. If you don't, you don't have to. We put an optional 3% on there, which we assume every community that ends up allowing in marijuana to be sold would adopt. And then finally, so that sort of rounded out the tax rate at 20% on sales. But what we also did was we said any community that, again, allows marijuana entities to operate in the municipality can negotiate a host agreement with that company for up to 3%. And that is really to offset some of the additional costs that may be borne by that community relative to having a marijuana establishment there. And so all in communities, if they choose to have it, can get up to 6%. And that was something that we thought was important, because just as the state has additional costs that we are bearing relative to this industry, local municipalities may have increased costs as well, and we wanted to be aware of that. You and I are going to have to do another show, because believe it or not, we have less than a minute left to talk, and which is, I know, shocking, because we talked beforehand about hitting so many different topics, but
And we have 2 pages left.
Yeah, and
Okay.
this is sort of the reality of every time we talk about these things, but this is an important conversation, and I like to make sure that people are aware of it. And so I think it's worthwhile, having spent the time that we did on this. But
I agree completely.
But clearly there's another show in our future, and I really appreciate you
Oh, my pleasure.
being on with me, and hopefully we can get together again soon and do this again when you're not busy writing for the Advocate and having 6 stories in an issue. So,
Which I love doing, by the way.
that's
So
terrific.
anytime, you just give me a holler.
That's terrific. Well, thank you for joining us here today on Conversations with Hannah. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the passage of not only question 4, but some of the refinements that the legislature and the governor signed into law had worked on. And certainly if you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me or call my office. I'm more than happy to talk about any of these issues with anyone. So thanks for listening.